And welcome back to the Contrarians. Today we're doing another Patreon suggested topic and talking about artists that are rarely discussed on the Contrarians. It's wide open. There are a hell of a lot of acts that we don't discuss very often, so let's see what people have come up with. Ashley, I'm going to start with you today. Tell us about some of your favorite less discussed artists.
Okay, thanks for having me on today, guys. And I thought the Parish might have stolen this one, but I'll go for my first pick. I'm going to talk about one of my favourite bands that I grew up as a kid loving, and it was my introduction to heavy rock, and I'm talking about the famous Status Quo. I've seen the guys 4 times over my journey. I've met all the guys as well. Met them about 24 years ago in the mall here in Adelaide in South Australia. And I just rattled off a few little facts that I printed off overnight. They've sold over 118 million albums, which is a record. They've recorded 64 British hit singles, more than any other band, and 22 of them have been top 10 hits. They made 106 appearances on BBC's Top of the Pops, more than any other group. They've released over 100 singles, and they've released 34 albums with their new album, Driving to Glory, which came out last month. I haven't listened to that yet, so I can't really give it a bit of a review. Their first single from the Heavy Traffic album was a song called Jam Side Down, and entered the UK chart at number 17 in 2002. And it was an achievement which Status Quo had a top 20 hit over 5 decades. They're a band here in Australia that were absolutely huge throughout the 1970s. They had about 4 number 1 albums, even had a live EP that went to number 1, which was they did Roll Over, Lay Down, and Durandler and Junior's Wailing on the B-side. I also have that. I didn't bring it out today. I got that signed as well. They had a bit of a dip in the 80s with some of their albums, and I must admit some of them aren't the best, but they certainly resurrected their career throughout the late 90s. Also appeared in a movie which, again, isn't the best. It's a bit of a laugh film, really. If anyone's ever seen it, it's not too bad. Done a Christmas song as well, which I play every year to annoy my kids and grandkids, as well as the Slade one as well. But yeah, a band that I must admit, I've never heard on the Contrarians before is Status Quo.
Okay, great. What was the name of the movie they were in?
It's called Bulla Quo.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and give us your other 2 picks too while you're on.
Okay. My second pick is an artist that I'll be seeing next year, as he is supporting ZZ Top, and that is George Thorogood. And just a few little things about George Thorogood. Sold over 15 million records worldwide, and a lot of his albums have been in the top 200 Billboard charts. He's also known for doing a lot of cover songs as well. And again, very, very popular here in Australia. And he'll be supporting ZZ Top on their 50th tour here in Australia next year. And I'll certainly be there. And he done his very first solo album back in 2017, The Party of One, which isn't too bad. And he was also a baseball player, I found out as well, in a junior league before he took up music. And also, the band's played more than 8,000 live shows throughout their career. So yeah, that was my second release, George Thorogood and the Destroyers.
Okay. And your last one? And
my last one is an artist that I didn't really know much about. I saw this artist probably 2 years ago. I haven't got any physical media on me at the moment of hers at the moment, but the artist I'm talking about is Samantha Fish. And I saw her 2 years ago, and there's my guitar pick that she gave me. We can see that. Now, Samantha Fish is a blues artist, and she's won many, many awards. She's also voted in the Top Guitar magazine as one of the top 100 greatest blues guitarists of all time. She's won the Blues Artist of the Year in 2018. And she's won many, many, many awards. So, an artist that I've just recently discovered when I first saw her, and no one's checked her out Please do. Very, very good indeed. Very good indeed. So my third pick was Samantha Fish.
Samantha Fish. Okay, very good. Thank you. You know, I always wonder with an artist like George Thorogood, what's really the difference between a George Thorogood solo album and a George Thorogood with the Destroyers album?
It's without the Destroyers, obviously, but it's very much the same. I really didn't pick it up myself, really, but yeah, I was surprised when I heard that as well. I'm thinking, wow, it's a solo album.
Right. It's like when Tom Petty put out his solo albums. I was like, is this any different than the Heartbreakers? It sounds exactly like the Heartbreakers to me.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Ashley.
No problem. Thank you.
Nice eclectic choice. Like to see new bands brought up. Nick, let's go to you next.
All right, good. And quickly, George Thorogood, he's been out there touring. I know he's done some U.S. dates and Canada dates. And I like it. Now that I live sort of where George is from in Delaware, he used to call that band the Delaware Destroyers. So somewhere along the line, they lost to Delaware. But
correct.
Yeah, he's still out there. He's good. And Samantha Fish just played. She's been around. She's on tour with there's like some package tour with her, I believe, with her record company. It's either Rough or Roof Records. And I know they played a couple venues here on the East Coast. I didn't get a chance to see her, but she plays her quite a bit. She sounds great. But let's see. You know, I'm going to give almost like and I don't know why we rarely mention these artists, but I usually labor in the second and third tier artists. But there's a lot of what I would describe as first tier artists that, for whatever reason, and I think there's multiple reasons, or perhaps even no reason why they're really not mentioned on the Contrarians. But notwithstanding the fact that we're getting ready to post something on this artist, like now, I'll give you an artist that is rarely mentioned here. And if I can find what I did with it, even though Martin put up a video out this guy, but he's rarely mentioned. Jimi Hendrix never comes up on the Contrarians. Not sure why. And the funny thing is, just since the family took over his estate and the whole record release thing, I mean, it's quite prolific. There's all sorts of releases on this guy. I don't even have a fraction of them. I was from the days when it was sort of lousy, almost like bootleg stuff, and the other studio releases. But for whatever reason, Hendrix isn't mentioned on the Contrarians much, but maybe that'll change. Here's another I would consider a top flight artist. He's floated in and out of my consciousness, but give you Santana. And he sold a lot of critical acclaim, sold a lot of units, has had hits. He's lasted since the 60s. He tours regularly, but for whatever reason, he doesn't come up on the Contrarians much. I'm going to go really broad here, so I don't want to step on toes, but you can fill it in. But there's a whole group of artists, and that would be any female who's ever played rock and roll, but for Pat Benatar and Hart, has never been really covered on the Contrarians, except in passing. I've tried to mention her a couple times, Joan. She doesn't really come up that much, or anyone associated with the Runaways. Lita looking lovely, that one, and even Sherry Curry has had albums out there, but. Anybody who's a female doesn't seem to get much attention on the Contrarians for whatever reason, and there's plenty of them out there. As I'm just going to keep ripping through them: Susie and Maggie Bell and Fanny, who I've mentioned with Parish before. Parish knows about their name, but there's lots of females out there, and hopefully maybe some of us will think of some other names. But females usually get the short end of the stick for a lot of reasons. I'm not sure, but L7. It's another band. I just saw them in the last couple of months with myself and John the Music Nut. They're awesome live. So the ladies know how to rock, and I'm not sure why. I'd like to explore that, see what the consensus is, at least in this group. But women in rock don't seem to get much coverage here.
Okay.
Susie Quattro is huge in Australia. She's always here. She's here next year in November, and every time she releases something new, she always comes to Australia because we're her number one country that her sales are mainly from, and she is great.
You're lucky because even though she's from the Detroit area, she hasn't played the U.S. in decades. Like she's never ever here. Although her sister ended up playing in Fanny at one point.
Yes.
She never plays here, and it's you have to be pretty aggressive to find her CDs and albums in the stores. What's left of the stores, but
I saw her play at the Royal Albert Hall. I'm trying to remember if it was the end of last year or the beginning of this year. which was the first time I'd seen her since the 80s. I saw her in the 80s a couple of times. And I think she lives over here because she's always on the telly. She's a bit of a celebrity over here.
She
So
does.
I'm pretty sure she lives over here, yeah.
She does. In the US, people just know her from having a guest starring role on the TV show Happy Days, where she played Leather Tuscadero. And so everyone remembers her from a few episodes back in the 70s when from that TV show, but they don't know her for her music. And maybe you might hear her on that duet Stumbling In, used to get some airplay here. But other than that, you don't hear her on the radio. She's just non-existent.
Yeah, never had a presence here. I didn't even know she was on Stumbling In.
She never took off in the US. She never took off in the US. The British people, I think, was it Mickey Most, and then discovered her in the US, and they brought her over to the UK, which she relocated over there, and that's really where she got her career started from, was over there.
Well, I think what we've learned is that, talent and success really have very little to do with each other, and if people succeed anywhere, they are really very fortunate.
Has any of you guys seen Cherie Curry live at all? Because she's in Australia next year also, and I've never seen her live, but I would really like to check her out if I could.
I think she's played the odd date or two in the US, but not much. If she does, it's always like a club thing. I'd love to see her perform. When I hear her stuff, it's very interesting, and I think she'd be great.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to see Joan Jett. It was at a small club just after I Love Rock and Roll was really big. So after that tour, she came back and did big. I think it wasn't arena. I think it was Hammersmith Odeon was where she came back a couple of weeks later, or a couple of months later. But I saw at a little town hall just up the road from where I lived. There was probably about 400 or 500 people there. And you can imagine it was absolutely jammed, and the number of people trying to get in, because I think it didn't get the number one over here, but I think it got to number 2 or number 3, so it was a huge hit. But I assume the tour was already booked, so she had to come over and play the small venues. But she was really good.
All right. Well, let's keep it going. We can always circle back around to random discussion at the end. So let's bounce across the pond to Parish. Parish, give us your choices.
Okay, well, the first one is a band I'm surprised doesn't get talked about as much as well, I don't think they get talked about at all, really. Bearing in mind we like our prog, and we're always complaining that there's not many big bands that have come about in the last 20 odd years. And the band I'm going to talk about in a sec has had 9 consecutive #1 albums in the UK, has had 6 #1 albums in the US. You would say the vocalist stroke guitarist is a modern rock hero, and yet nobody ever talks about them. And they fill out stadia around the world. They can headline big concerts, headline big festivals. And the band I'm going to talk about is Muse. So to me, I got into Muse with the second album, and I think I've seen them 4 or 5 times now. They're always really good live. They're a mix of prog rock, techno rock, bit of new wave, lots of Queen influences, quite a bit of glam rock influences, and just an amazing band. And as I say, when people say to me, well, rock and roll's kind of had its day, really, we don't have any new heroes, well, I always point to Muse, because I think, they're one of a few, but they're definitely worldwide and up there and pushing the boundaries. So we never seem to talk about them. And as I say, bearing in mind our love of prog, and they're probably one of the biggest, I suppose you'd call them prog adjacent, if you use Grant's phrase, prog adjacent bands. And as I say, people like Queen, I think they'd like Muse. And I think it's unusual to have that many consecutive #1 albums. They're not particularly a singles band. I mean, they've had a few hit singles, but not particularly a singles band. But as I say, big albums in the UK and in America. Are they big in Australia at all?
Not too bad. They have had some success, and I'm sure they've toured here a couple of times, but I can't say I've really listened to them enough to give an honest opinion.
Yeah. So my second one I'm going to go with is a band from the early 70s, and it's T-Rex.
Oh.
So, you know, for me, another iconic band with Mark Boland, huge number of hit singles. I think between 72 and 74, they had more number one singles than anybody else, including Slade. Everybody thinks of them as Mark Boland, but there was other members of the band like Herbie Flowers and Mickey Finn on drums who make up the band. And he was actually having a comeback, Mark Boland, unfortunately, when he tragically died in the car crash in 77. But bearing in mind, we like our riffs, we like our sort of guitar heroes. It just surprises me nobody ever mentions T-Rex. Now, I know apart from Get It On, I don't think that he was particularly, or they were particularly big in the States, and maybe that's one of the reasons. But nonetheless, there's plenty of other bands that weren't particularly big in the States that we talk about quite frequently. So it does surprise me that Mark Boland, who to me is the ultimate rock star or pop star, really, and it was Mark Boland that I saw in 72 that set me on my journey for liking rock music. And I think he created glam rock. And if you look at that image, you can almost see where Paul Stanley pinched the idea for his hair and his cat suits and everything else from. So I think he's probably an influence on Paul Stanley. And then the last one I'm going to go with is a more modern band. I'm not surprised this band doesn't get talked about much in the Contrarians, but nonetheless, they're a huge band in the States. Again, I would think one of the biggest rock bands of the last 20 years. Dave Edmunds had a song called Number One on the Jukebox and Nowhere in the Charts. And I think that sums up this band because they've had more number one singles on the rock chart in America than any other band, but they don't seem to be able to crack the main charts. And the band is Shinedown. So, as I say, I mean, one of the reasons I like Shinedown is that back probably about 15 years ago, they were huge in America, doing really well, and they came over to the UK. And unlike most bands who are on a you know sort of big role in their home country, they didn't try to play large venues. They started at the clubs and they toured the clubs relentlessly and built up a following over here, such that now they can actually fill out arenas every time they come over. And I think you've got to give credit to a band who's massive in one country and then comes over to another and is prepared to start again and build up that following. This album, and the other reason is what I'm surprised they don't get talked about. This album and a couple of their others are actually concept albums. So again, we like our concept albums on the Contrarians, and yet Shinedown never gets a mention. So those were my three that I decided to go with.
Okay, very good. Well, I think a theme we're going to kind of see, although status quo is an outlier, every group has its own dynamic and lowest common denominator. Our common pool in the Contrarians is more or less 1973 to 1983. And that's where you see 90% of the bands that people bring up for whatever reason. Plus, let's face it, we're old. So, Andrew, let's go down.
But T-Rex would fit in that category as well as Quo.
Yeah, T-Rex.
Yes, definitely.
T-Rex was just, they never had the saturation here. People know them more for covers of their songs.
Yeah.
T-Rex versions.
Mm-hmm.
The godfather of glam.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew, let's go to you.
All right. This is so cool to get to do this because with Ash on here, because I have two Australian bands in my five. So my first is, let's see if I can get a good picture on this.
Midnight Oil.
Midnight Oil.
Yeah.
One of all these bands at one point or another were my favorite band. So Midnight Oil, I loved them during the 80s, loved them during the 90s. I finally got to see them like 5 years ago in New York City, and they were just incredible. Had so much fun seeing them, and then just awesome. Just love that band. I love their entire catalog. I think they are underappreciated. If anybody knows them, it's for one song over here. I'm sure they were bigger over in Australia and other
Oh.
places, but here they are known for literally one song, maybe, if they're known at all. Yeah. My next, also Australian. Let's take this out of case here. This is the stupidest name, but apparently at one point they went by the Angels from Angel City. So stupid. No wonder everyone was confused and could not figure out who they were. They started out as the Angels. When they came over here, they were afraid they'd get mixed up with a girl group, so they became Angel City, and then they morphed into the Angels from Angel City later. So stupid. Nobody could possibly follow that. They're a fantastic band. I watch their live footage on YouTube all the time. They're still around, right, Ash? They've got a different singer.
They are, yes.
Yeah.
They just released a new album,
Yeah.
50 Not Out, I'm sure it's called.
Yeah.
But they have a different singer in that. They did have Dave Gleason from the Screaming Jets vocaling for a while,
Right.
but he currently left. So they have a new one out. I haven't heard the whole new album yet. I've heard the single. The single's quite good.
The album's
But
good.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I like the album.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm yet to hear. Yeah, they were part of the Australian pub rock scene. They were huge
Right.
in
Yeah.
the 1980s. Same with Midnight Oil. They were as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. So the Angels toured with AC/DC around the Back in Black for those about to rock over here in the US, but it never did any good for getting them popular over here. But I love them. I discovered them probably in the mid-90s and loved them ever since. My third is an American band. We are talking Los Lobos.
Wow.
Love this band. They have had such a long career. I finally saw them a couple years ago down in Portland. They were incredible. I love the bands that can like just swap instruments out, and this guy sings this and this guy sings this, and they're all just top level musicians, and it was so much fun. So that's my third choice, Los Lobos.
It's a good one.
Thank you.
Okay. And you're right. Those are a little bit off the beaten track for us, but that's great. Like I said, one of the things I love about doing these panels is introducing new music to people. So I'm going to move on to, I try and throw him some publicity when I can here. Oh, because we have a rocker in the Contrarians talking about Andy Black Sugar. This is his latest album with Black Sugar Transmission, Battered Satellite. And, Andy's a class act. He doesn't publicize himself, but, it's not your uncle who's in a bar band. Andy's in 2 international touring acts. He plays with Blondie and KMFDM. He plays with Jason Bieler in the Baron von Bielski Orchestra. He's done albums with him, played lead guitar for Jason at Prague Power. But he also has 2 acts of his own, Sheer Velocity and Black Sugar Transmission. Sheer Velocity is all instrumental shred. Black Sugar Transmission is eclectic music. Battered Satellite he released this year, although as I understand it, some of the songs were as old as 2018. It's what I call kind of light industrial. Andy's music is very heavily beat-based. He has a very heavy beat, lots of synthesizers and sound treatments. And Andy's a great singer and a generational guitar talent. He's just an amazing guitar player. I said he hasn't been on a video in a while. He's a busy guy, and he's too classy to come on here and say, hey, buy my stuff. But doggone it, go out and look him up on YouTube. It's free, and his music is amazing. And I think that the Contrarians should make more of a big deal that he's with us. And yes, I'm a fan.
I agree. And Andy's he's a raconteur. He's fun to be with. Had a chance to hang out with him twice. Saw KMFDM twice last year. Saw Blondie. He's a great guitar player live. He's got great stage presence. Just a really solid fellow. And you're right about that. He's a creative. He gets accolades from people like Vernon Reid. So when you get the attention of Vernon Reid, that tells me something, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and whether you know it or not, you've heard him play because he plays the Contrarians theme music.
Yep.
There you go.
So Andy Blacksugar, check out Battered Satellite. I badgered him to release this album cover as a t-shirt,
Oh,
which
really?
he did. And I love it. Okay. Now talk about bands that we don't talk about much, but you kind of wonder why. I thought I would talk about my favorite power metal band. I have kind of an off and on relationship with power metal. Sometimes I really get into it. Sometimes it's just, it's not for me right now. It is one of the biggest forms of heavy metal in Europe right now. It never really gained a massive foothold in America. But back in the 80s, my introduction to power metal, well, I always say Ritchie Blackmore and Ronnie Dio in Rainbow are like the godparents of power metal. And then Iron Maiden and Yngwie Malmsteen are the cool older uncles of power metal. But the first band that you would really call power metal in the modern sense is going to be Halloween. Like a lot of metal fans my age, my first exposure to them was hearing the single A Little Time off of their seminal Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1 album on a radio show. And I went right out to the record store and bought that cassette. I don't have it anymore, but I played it so much that I wore all of the lettering off of the plastic. It was one of those. I just loved it. And when they came out with Keeper Part 2, many people will argue that this is the first true power metal album. So you've got two screaming guitarists in Kai Hansen and Michael Wyketh. You've got a screaming singer very much in the upper, at the upper end of the Rob Halford scale. He's a very high singer in Michael Kiske. And the only real kind of strike against them in the United States is Kai Hansen as a personality. Kai is very much, he was a jokester. He wrote a lot of funny songs. And I think that American metalheads in the 80s took themselves very seriously, which is kind of difficult to remember what that was like when you were, in your late teens or early 20s now that we're old. But at the time, metal was serious business, man. You don't want those jokey songs. So I did not really cry when Kai left and Roland Grappow came in. My favorite albums then are going to be actually with Roland Grappow as the second guitar player, Michael Kiske out, and Andy Darris in. Andy sings in a much more, well, he has a high range, but he generally sings in more of a mid range. And they put out a bunch of great albums. The Keeper of the, or Master of the Rings, The Time of the Oath, Better Than Raw, and my personal favorite, The Dark Ride, produced by Roy Z, the man who frequently collaborates with Halford on his solo albums and Bruce Dickinson on his solo albums. It's a great eclectic album. It's got some real songs that were clearly designed to be singles because they're very repetitious and catchy. It's got some real heavy bits on it. And Halloween include a lot of Iron Maiden-esque epic tracks as the last track on their album, and I think that The Dark Ride is one of their best. Now, Grappow was out after this, and they brought in a guitar player named Sasha Gerstner, and have released a bunch of albums since, and they are all fine, but they don't really quite reach up to that level. But nonetheless, Halloween have been around since Keeper Part 1 was in 87. They actually had an album and an EP out prior to that. So they've been around for a long time, and they are still absolutely amazing. I'm sure that there are other Halloween fans in the Contrarians, but somehow it just never comes up.
The Walls of Jericho album, the album before that, is a classic. Absolute classic.
Yes.
That's my favorite, my personal favorite.
I compare The Walls of Jericho to like Iron Maiden's first album. So you've got Kai Hansen singing. It's got a lot punkier energy. It's much more speed metal than power metal.
Yes.
So a very different vibe to it. It's more similar to what you would get in Gamma Ray in a couple of years. Now, I'm kind of going to go very broad for my last pick because rather than a band, I'm going with a music label.
Oh, all right.
So, and that music label is called Ripple Music. Ripple, R-I-P-P-L-E Music. So Ripple is a label that specializes in doom, stoner, heavy psych, and desert rock and metal. As these things go, my eternal love of guitar pedals led me to exploring doom metal last year. I avoided it for years because it's funny, as much of a Black Sabbath fanatic as I am, I was not interested in bands that were heavily influenced by Black Sabbath. But finally last year, I was just like, I don't know why I'm being such a snob about this. I just need to start exploring this. And one of the first bands I picked up was The Obsessed, and they were fantastic.
Oh.
So The Obsessed put out an album this year called Gilded Sorrow. It's one of my top albums of the year, and it's on Ripple Music. So, you know, the way algorithmic marketing works, I go to Bandcamp, I buy a lot of music on Bandcamp, go to Bandcamp, buy The Obsessed latest album, and now Ripple Music starts sending me emails saying, hey, consider our other bands, which I kind of ignore because I just do. But then I finally went, well, maybe I'll check these guys out. So I went to Ripple Music on Bandcamp, and they actually have several sampler album collections. So I bought two, one called Ripples of Doom and one called Lost in the Desert, Ripples Under the Sun. So I think one of them's 18 tracks and one of them's like 15 tracks. Ripples of Doom was on sale for $1 when I bought it. 15 different bands, and I listened to it, and I probably like 14 of the 15 bands. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I put in the desert rock one, and I loved all of it. So since then, I've just started diving into their catalog. I'm like, oh, I don't know who these guys are, but I'm going to buy a CD from them. Well, excuse me, I'm going to buy electronic music. I buy music in the FLAC format and listen to it on a digital audio player. One band that I bought on an absolute whim is called White Witch Canyon. White Witch Canyon is no more, but the singer and drummer from White Witch Canyon now sings in a band called The Watchers. The Watchers put out a new album this year called Nyctophilia. I was first attracted to their EP called Sabbath Highway. I thought, well, these guys aren't trying to hide their influences, are they? Sabbath Highway is fantastic. They have an album out called Black Abyss. It was fantastic. Nyctophilia came out this year. It's fantastic. Every release, they actually get a little less doomy and just a little more straight heavy metal. But the Watchers have become one of my favorite acts. And this year, or right at the end of the year, I decided to buy an album called Beneath the Desert Floor No. 7 by a band called The Dear Deceased. Now, obviously, Beneath the Desert Floor is Ripple Music's kind of sampler albums of different desert rock. Dear Deceased, frankly, that name sounds like a goth parody. I don't think it's doing them any favors, but it's very serious music. It's way doomier than modern The Watchers. So, you know, I do not understand the differences between doom, stoner, heavy psych, and desert. I'm sure that somebody who is more into those genres could probably define them at length. It's all heavy metal to me. You can hear the Black Sabbath influence. You can hear some Jimi Hendrix influence. You can hear, you know, Motorhead. And sometimes I hear like Steppenwolf or Thin Lizzy or some other more rock and roll type of bands. But I have yet to find an album on Ripple Music that I didn't like. I'm sure they're there, but I've just been picking albums at random, and they have been absolutely wonderful. But I will absolutely put my stamp of approval on The Watchers and The Obsessed. You can only get 2 albums from The Obsessed on Ripple Music. The rest of them are on different labels. You know, as smaller bands often do, they've had to jump from label to label as they go around their career. But pick up everything from The Watchers and The Obsessed on Ripple Music, and then while you're there, check out some other stuff. I got a sampler CD with a band called Mr. Bison, which I was shocked to learn was Italian, because that is a very non-Italian name, but they're an amazing band. So if you like those genres or just heavy music in general, give them a chance. Ripple Music, buy one of their samplers. It's pay what you want, pay them a decent price. I mean, I feel bad for buying that one album for $1, so the next time I bought one, I tipped them a lot more money for it. But it's all available on Bandcamp. You can get it anywhere. you know, they don't, it's not like they're paying me or something. I just love music, and I really love discovering the Obsessed last year and the Watchers this year. So I'm looking forward to diving deeper into that catalog pool as we go. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too too broad. But said I want to turn people on to some new music. I think the Watchers are getting talked about in some other areas. I don't see the Obsessed getting talked about, and we've certainly never talked about them on the Contrarians. Except I brought them up for the Best of 2024 show that we did a few months back. All right, rarely talked about. Okay, that's everybody. Does anybody have like final thoughts? Or I know Nick's got some honorable mentions. Anybody else want to throw out some honorable mentions, Ashley?
Yeah, I can. Australian band where Jimmy Barnes first started from, Cold Chisel. No one seemed to talk about Cold Chisel enough. I know that they didn't really break into the American market, but down here in Australia, they were absolutely huge throughout the 70s and 80s, fronted by Jimmy Barnes, part of the Aussie pop rock scene again, and really think about the Australian life and way we do things down here, like drinking and going out and all about the life. A bit like Midnight, but Midnight Oil are very political and with a lot of their lyrics over there as well. And speaking of the Angels when they were there, they were also signed to Alberts on their first 3 albums, which were part of the AC/DC legacy as well.
Yep.
So there you go for that. Another band that doesn't get mentioned here, Rose Tattoo. Another great Aussie band from over here. They're touring pretty much soon for their 50th anniversary, I think. I think they're going to call it quits after that. Fronted by Angry Anderson, and they've been a very big influence on the band Guns N' Roses. And they've always been on support with them. They've played with them quite a few times, actually. Another part of the Aussie pub rock scene as well. They came from Angry came from a band in the 70s called Buster Brown, which are a bit of a Lobby Lloyd Sharpie type of band, which is a bit of a movement we had here in the 70s in Australia. And they've just evolved into that hard rock scene as well. So that's another one I could mention. And probably another Australian act is the Divinals with Chrissy Amphlett. They were very similar as well. They had it in America with I Touch Myself, I think about 91 that came out over there. But again, another big band here in Australia throughout its time. So that's all my honorables.
Okay, very good. All right, Nick, give us a few of your honorables. Maybe not all 20 of them.
No, not all 20. I'll give you one that I don't even have an example of, but I would consider this artist or this band a top tier band, at least in the US, and that is CCR. I don't think CCR has ever been mentioned on the Contrarians, ever.
Love them.
And they've had hit after hit after hit after hit. You know, they've had an odd history, which I think may tend to make people shy away from them, at least talking about. If you've seen John Fogerty live in the last 20 years or so, you know, he's a very dynamic, powerful performer. I had that luxury of seeing him with Willie Nelson opening, actually. And John Fogerty can sing. So that'd be one. The other one, and I can't say I'm the biggest fan, but I don't know if he's ever been mentioned on the Contrarians really in any great detail. This guy, Rod Stewart, and the Faces and Beck. And maybe that's because he became a crooner. And I know he's getting ready to retire, and he has that tour that he's going to be jaunting around and charging a lot of money for tickets. But you know, he has a lot of product, a lot of output, and you know, maybe he wasn't the most critical favorite of the intelligentsia, but he certainly sold a lot of albums and was a popular artist. And the last one I'll give you is probably one of my favorite bands of all time. And you rarely hear them on the Contrarians, and that's Cream. And they're incredibly influential in heavy rock, hard rock, heavy metal. And we're here for a brief amount of time. Maybe that's part of the problem, limited output. But really just an amazing wealth of material, at least for me. And I always go back to it at least a few times a year. So it'd be Cream. And of course, you know, for me, I'm a big Jack Bruce fan. So if you have any interest in Cream, Jack Bruce, there's just tons of material on Jack Bruce out there. So
Rod Stewart sang on the first 2 Jeff Beck albums as well as part of the Jeff Beck group.
That's right.
So
Yes,
they're
exactly.
worth checking out as well. They're quite good albums as well.
That's right.
John Fogerty is fantastic live. I've seen him twice. Very, very good. Very, very good. Just like playing a record.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got a great voice too. That's one of those bands, deceptively, It's rare you can hear a cover band pull them off because of the vocals. He's just a great singer. It's kind of like AC/DC. You know, it's very simple music, but good luck reproducing and replicating that.
Right. All right, Parish, honorable mentions?
Yeah, the first one I'm going to go with is Blackfoot.
Blackfoot.
I don't think
Oh,
I've
good
ever
one.
heard Blackfoot mentioned. One of my favourite bands. They had a good run of, I think, 4 or 5 albums on the trot, from Strikes through Tom Catting, through that Marauder, which is my favourite one. Searock, which is a bit different, but still very good. Saw them live a few times back in the day. Really good live band. Ricky Metlock, I think his vocals is very underrated, and just certainly one of the best bands I ever saw live, and I saw them live a few times. A lesser known band, Coney Hatch, I thought I'd put up there. Coney Hatch, I think they're Canadian. I might be corrected.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, but I think they're
Yes.
corrected. I saw them a few times again back in the day. Very good. Released a few. There's another one. A few good albums. But they never get mentioned, and the reason I picked them is we've got a few Canadians on the show, so it's a bit of a surprise they don't get mentioned much, but there you go. Billy Squire, another one,
yes.
another artist I think is really good from the early 80s, seems to be forgotten now. But going back, he released an album I think last year, which was really good.
It was a
and
great
then-
album.
Then you kind of spoilt it for me because you actually mentioned this one, Reed. I was going to say Tom Petty. Tom Petty is one of the biggest ever artists in the US. Pretty big in the UK as well, but never seems to get mentioned. Which, but as I say, he did earlier, so proves me wrong. Whether you're talking about with the Heartbreakers, whether you're talking about his solo stuff, just a sort of iconic act. And that's it. There were my. I did have another one which I didn't pull out didn't pull anything out on, which was ELO, and I thought I'd mention them because another big band. They've just done their farewell tour in the States. I've got tickets to see them. I think in March. No, a bit later. I think probably middle of next year on their farewell tour in the UK. It is really just Jeff Lynne now. It's not. I don't think there's anybody else left in the band. But yeah, another massive band, huge influences, but we never seem to mention very much is ELO. So they were my honourable mentions.
Okay. Hey, true story. My very first video with the Contrarians, I talked about Blackfoot Searock.
Oh wow!
Oh, well, there you go.
And I don't think anybody's brought them up in the last 4 years. So there you have it.
I mean, it's rarely Parish. Ricky Medlock's trotting them out in the spring in the U.S. and they're going to
Is
play. Yeah, they were playing a place that John the Music Nut and I frequent. So I'm going to try to get to see them. I have not seen them, and I heard exactly what you said. They're phenomenal. Although it's just
they are
Ricky,
brilliant.
It's Ricky and guys. But
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen him more recently with
Skinner.
what they're called. Yeah,
Skinner.
Skinner. Thank you. So so I have seen him more, but he doesn't sing when he's with Skinner. He's just guitar. But and then going back to the Australian contingent, I was lucky enough to see the Angels in the early 80s open for Cheap Trick. They were awesome. Unfortunately, their image didn't go down very well. They were dressed in suits with short hair. And were playing to rockers who kind of just booed them off stage as mods, really, which was a shame. I saw Cold Chisel, which started me on a love for Jimmy Barnes. Jimmy Barnes is actually my top 3 favourite artists of all time. But the biggest problem for Cold Chisel was they came over, they supported Slade. I went out the next day to buy some records, couldn't get them anywhere. Went all over the place, couldn't get them on import, couldn't get them at the big stores. And I don't think it did them any favours because they'd just done a tour around the UK, and if they didn't got any product out, people forget very quickly. And I think that did it for them. I've seen Jimmy Barnes a few times. Love him live. He's really good. He tends to play Shepherd's Bush because there's a large Australian contingent in Shepherd's Bush, and he plays Glasgow because I think he comes from Glasgow. So whenever he comes over,
oh wow,
it's one of those 2 places that you see him. And then I was lucky enough to see Rose Tattoo at the Marquee when they first came over. Absolutely awesome. And I saw them a few times back in the day. And in fact, I nearly picked them. I nearly had Rose Tattoo as one of my actors that I was going to pick. So really good choices, those Australian ones.
Yeah, Mark Evans is in Rose Tattoo, the original bassist from AC/DC at the
Yeah,
current moment.
is he?
So yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So yeah, check
I
him
assume
out.
it's still angry singing, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And our fellow contrarian Peter Kerr has interviewed Angry Anderson over on his YouTube channel.
He has.
Yeah, he did.
Stream
Yeah.
Nation. All right, Andrew, have any
Okay.
honorable mentions? I
certainly do. I have several, but I'll go through them quickly. Going back just for a second, I saw Rose Tattoo on the Monsters of Rock cruise a couple years ago, and they were the last band on the first night, and they did like an hour, and the guys on the side of the stage are like, you're done, get off, you're done. They played 6 more songs. It's the most rock and roll thing I've seen in years. It was so cool. They were magnificent. Yeah, they were so much fun. So my honorable mentions. Let's see, there we go. Blaze Bayley in Wolfsbane. Yep. He was obviously in Iron Maiden for 2 albums, and he's also been a solo. He's had a solo career since he left Maiden. The William Black trilogy that came out a couple years ago, they did 3 albums. Fantastic. If you don't know Blaze Bayley from anything but Iron Maiden, check out Wolfsbane. Check out his solo stuff. It's incredible. Scottish band, Gallus. Gun. The second album's called Gallus. I love these records. I heard Checking on the World back in the day off the first album, fell in love with it. I've been a fan ever since. They're big in the UK from what I hear, but they never got any ground here in the US at all. The prog rock band, Crack the Sky.
Yep.
Virtually unknown anywhere except for us music people. Out of Baltimore, they still play in Baltimore like 4 or 5 times a year, but never here. This is the worst album cover, unfortunately, but Metal Church, an incredible US heavy metal band that never got their respect. Another great metal band I just saw earlier this year open up for Wasp, Armored Saint. Incredible. One of my favorite bands of all time. Just awesome. There's their box set of Symbol of Salvation. And then my last one is the band Gillan. From Ian Gillan. The 5 albums that he did with as the Gillan Band, just incredible. I don't much care for his, like the first couple solo albums he did, but everything from this one, Mr. Universe, through the next 4 albums are just some of the best stuff that's ever been released, and nobody knows it hardly. So those are my choices.
Well, one of the peculiar things about the Contrarians is because we have Martin Popoff as one of the movers and shakers in the Contrarians. Martin does so many shows with so many people on YouTube, and he talks about Gillan a lot over on Sea of Tranquility. So yep. I think people just go, oh, well, Martin's already covered that, so we're not going to talk about it over here. So that's an interesting part of this particular little corner of YouTube. So there you have it, folks. That is a lot of different acts. Obviously, we could have come up with 20 or 30,000 more. There are entire genres that we never talk. We don't cover grunge. We don't cover post-punk. We don't cover, who knows what else. We don't cover industrial. We don't cover goth. These are just the things I listen to. I mean, you can think of a dozen genres that we don't listen or that we never get into at all. So down below, leave us a comment. Tell us some bands you would like us to cover. Maybe somebody will see it and suggest it for a future panel. Thank you for spending this time with us. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. If you did, click that like button. Hey, did that sound YouTube-y enough? Consider looking at the Patreon. We'd love to have you. It's a great community. And everybody who participates in the panels is a patron. And we are very happy that you spent this time with us. We'll see you again very soon on another video. Everybody, that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.